Welcome to Mike Trabulsie's Institute for the Artistry of Drumming. I'm Mike Trabulsie, and this is Legends of Drumming. Today, I want to share with you some of my thoughts about the legendary rock drummer, John Bonham. John Bonham was the thundering rhythmic force behind the iconic and now classic rock band Led Zeppelin, and certainly was a huge part of the sound and success of Led Zeppelin. When I think of John Bonham, the first thing that comes to mind is that big, fat, heavy groove and sound. It's classic Bonham, very identifiable. In my opinion, there are three elements to that groove and sound. First, you have the gear that John Bonham used. The drums, the sticks, the cymbals, the heads, and all of those factors involved in the equipment. Second, you have the recording aspect. The microphones that were used, the mic placement, the environment that the drums were recorded in. And of course, you have, again, with respect to the recording process itself, you have the mixing and processing element. What did they do to the sound? In the 1970s, there were less things that you could do and that were done to the sound when compared to today in the very, very sophisticated environment of processing and plugins. Thirdly, you have the performer, their body structure, the way they hit the drums, and the way they play the drums. So you have three elements to the sound aspect of John Bonham. With respect to the equipment and the recording, I am certainly not well versed enough to give you exact specifics. This class is really to speak about the Bonham style of drumming and the characteristic elements of the Bonham style of drumming. But how can you talk about Bonham without talking about that sound? So I'll mention a few generalities and a couple of things that I know from little research that I did on John Bonham. As far as the equipment is concerned, as you know, we had a smaller set, kick drum, snare drum, one mounted tom, and I think typically he had two floor toms. There may have been occasions where he had one. And for the majority of his career, Ludwig drums. And they were big drums. I believe he had a 26-inch bass drum. Just so you know, that's enormous. That is a big bass drum. I mean, I don't know anybody that played a 26-inch bass drum. So I've read that he played a 26-inch bass drum. For comparison, the one I have here is a 22. I use that exclusively for everything I do. Neil Peart, as an example, had two 24s. Those are big bass drums. So if Bonham was using a 26, that is certainly going to lend itself to a very big sound. The snare drum was a 14 by a 6.5 inch deep. and that's a big snare drum. A 14-inch mounted tom, 16 and 18-inch floor toms. So he had big drums, and big drums equal big sound. I don't know what ply the drums were. That has to do with the thickness of the shell of the drum. And in my experience over many years of owning and playing many different drum sets, the thinner the ply or the thinner the shell, the more resonant and bigger the sound. The thicker the ply or the thicker the shell, the less resonant or smaller the sound. So I'm going to guess Bonham probably was using, I don't know, maybe a 6-ply, a thinner shell. Don't know for sure, but I'm guessing. And as far as the sticks that he used, again, I don't know what he used, but I would venture to guess he probably used a heavier stick, maybe longer, and probably a fatter tip. A heavier, longer stick with a fatter tip will certainly lead to a bigger sound. As for the recording process and gear and environment, back in the 70s when Bonham was recording, obviously recording was still, I would say, in its infancy, especially compared to today. And with the limited number of tracks available compared to today, where, it's literally unlimited. Even in my own recordings, I have some songs that I've produced that have 75, 100 tracks. It's unreal. But back to Bonham, they had limited tracks, so it's my guess that there was limited microphones used. And the placement of those microphones on the drums makes a difference. Whoever engineered those Zeppelin sessions probably had microphone placement a little further away from the drums and probably even used some room mics. Microphones out there somewhere in the room away from the drum set to capture the sound of the room. And I am certain that Bonham was recorded in bigger rooms, open rooms, rooms that lent themselves to a big sound. That sound, they went for that sound. It didn't just happen by chance. I don't think it did. Of course, Bonham played the way he played, which lent itself to a certain particular sound. But I think they enhanced that to really capture what Bonham was delivering and to craft a sound that blended well with the music of Led Zeppelin. The final element of sound has to do with the artist, and that is, how does that drummer play the drums? And if you listen to the Legends of Drumming Neil Peart class, I go into quite a bit of detail on this subject. And I'll just briefly state here that the drummer's musculoskeletal structure and their brain and the wiring between their brain and their musculoskeletal structure affects the way they play the drum. And also importantly is the level of tension versus relaxation that the drummer applies, either knowingly or most often unknowingly. That is often something that develops naturally with the drummer, with the artist. And happens usually without thought. Those things affect the way the drums sound. And Bonham was a highly individualized human being, like all of us, who played and hit the drums a certain way. And that lent itself to a certain sound, which was then captured and enhanced in the recording process by way of the equipment that was used and the recording process itself. I want to point out one other factor in the Bonham sound. I am not familiar with every single song in the Led Zeppelin discography, but I'm familiar with a lot of them. And it is my general impression as I sit here thinking about it that a lot of those songs were, I would say, on the medium side in terms of tempo. And when the tempos are, we'll say, medium down to a little slower, it allows you to pull the sound out of the drums because you're not playing so fast. Sometimes when you get to the brighter tempos, you're moving. You're moving along with your fills and your beats, and, things are happening. The space between the notes is short. Whereas medium to slower tempos, there's more space between the notes, and there's more room to pull a big fat sound out of the drums. I know that's probably totally overthought, but I think that's true. I think it's true. I mean, I know sometimes when I'm playing slower to medium, I can really just very fluidly and in a relaxed way pull a big fat sound out of the drums. Just let those drums ring and resonate. All I can tell you is, altogether, Bonham had a really big, fat, thundering, rhythmic groove and sound. Highly identifiable and legendary. The next element of the John Bonham style, which really sticks out in my mind, is the way he played the bass drum. And he was quite busy with his bass drum. I mean, he played a lot. Very active bass drum. Lots of 16th notes. And one thing that was really signature to him was the use of the 16th note triplet. Now, I do have a class here at the school. It's called Heavy Grooves John Bonham Style. And in that class, I have a lot of playing examples of the rhythms he played and specifically including those 16th note triplets on the bass drum. But that's something he did a lot. And you hear it in many, many Zeppelin tunes. He had a very well-developed right bass drum foot, and he used it. He definitely used it. And that is really another key element of the John Bonham style. The next thing that comes to mind, of course, is his level of technique. That would include the development of his hands, his feet, his right foot and his left foot, and then the independence and coordination. For me, independence is the ability of each limb, right hand, right foot, to function independently of the other. And the coordination element is getting those four limbs to work and communicate together. Independence and coordination was a big element in the John Bonham style. Really to highlight that, I mean, there are many, you can point to many songs, many Zeppelin tunes where there's a lot of different things going on in the limbs. I would say take a listen to the drum solo Moby Dick. You know, he's got that hi-hat chicken eighth notes, and he's playing 16th note triplets on the snare drum with 16th notes, and he's dropping the bass drum in there. You know, I don't know if you've ever tried that technique. Chicken the hi-hat, a steady pattern, like, for example, eighth notes, and then playing against that. And by the way, once you get it developed, it's like autoplay. It just runs and you don't even need to think about it. But until that point, there's a pretty high level of independence and coordination that goes into being able to play that hi-hat independently of the other three limbs. And so, anyways, Bonham's technique of independence and coordination, he had that in spades. I mean, Black Dog was a great example of that. Communication breakdown. So much of his playing involved a high level of technique, including the coordination and independence element. Something to pay attention to when you're listening to John Bonham. I want to point out that he did play a lot on the snare drum. I mean, he only had primarily a four-piece kit. And when you have a four-piece kit, your thinking goes from here down to here. There's not a lot of sonic elements to work with and consider. But again, in the 70s, excluding the prog rock drummers like, say, Neil Peart or Carl Palmer, a lot of drummers use that basic kit. And by the way, it's where most of us start. And it's a good place to start. But anyways, he had that basic kit. So the snare drum, the bass drum got used a lot. And obviously, that is the essence of the rock groove. Kick, snare, hi-hat, or ride cymbal. Bonham played a lot on the snare drum. I have in the school, I also have a lecture about drum solos, you know, sort of an introduction to the classes on drum solos. And I mentioned in that, and it's worth repeating here, that many of the great drum soloists build their solos off the snare drum, off that one drum, which is why I have snare drum mastery classes at the school. Developing the snare drum, it's key to so many things: beats, fills, solos, but solos especially. You know, the great drummers, a lot of them build their solos off of the snare drum. Not all of them. For example, Tommy Aldridge, his solos are built on the double bass drum, and they're awesome. But you take a look at even Neil Peart or Carl Palmer, those guys, John Bonham, their solos are built off the snare drum. And again, Bonham, listen to Moby Dick. That solo is on the snare drum. He's got that hi-hat chicken. He's playing 16th note triplets, 16th notes. In fact, you'll hear some multiple bounce rolls, which is, I believe, rudiment number 4 of the 40 international drum rudiments. You have the single stroke roll, the single stroke 4, the single stroke 7, and then rudiment number 4 is the multiple bounce roll. And that's a difficult rudiment to play. In my opinion and experience in teaching, it's the most difficult of all the rudiments. And Bonham's, you know, in his Moby Dick solos, some of them, I've heard some different ones, he's ripping those off all the time, throwing them in there. So that demonstrates that high level of snare drum technique. Again, developing your hands. And the other thing I'll say about Bonham, he really played from the heart. Or as we say in Boston, heart. He played from the heart. Man, it takes effort to say that when you're from Boston. Anyways, all that aside, Bonham was a soulful drummer. The great drummers are. And when I say soulful, I don't mean soulful as in 60s funky. I mean soulful as in full of heart. He put himself into the music. I doubt that he was playing those drums thinking about, oh, I'm going to play this, I'm going to play that, I'm going to, he was playing music. He was injecting his artistry, which is the soulful expression of your inner self. He was injecting that into all of that music, which made those Bonham grooves just amazing. I don't know if you can hear that. It's thundering outside. My microphones pick up everything. There's no running sinks in this studio when I'm recording. But anyways, yeah, Bonham played from the heart. And that's the best way to drum. I mean, yes, you want to get in the practice room and practice your rudiments and your coordination and independence and technique and all that, but you got to put that all away at some point along the way. Even as you work towards the highest levels you can attain, you want to get comfortable with getting that stuff out and just playing from the heart. And he did that. I think it's one of the reasons he's well loved. So let's have a quick summary here. We have the big, fat, heavy, thundering grooves and feel of John Bonham. We have the awesome single bass drum technique and the heavy use of it in the Zeppelin rhythms. We have the highly advanced technique, including his ability to use his hands with the drumsticks, to play. His development of his left foot, the development of his right foot, all those are part of technique, and the development of his independence and coordination. So we had that high level of technical ability. And then finally, I put that in as a side, but his masterful use of the snare drum, most specifically in his solos. And Moby Dick, to the best of my knowledge, was the big solo song that he played in. And he used a lot of snare drum. And finally, we don't want to leave out the deepest element of artistry, which is playing what you feel. And of course, if you're playing in Led Zeppelin, there's no other way to play but what you feel. That music is all heart and soul. John Bonham, as I mentioned, he's one of the legends and one of the greats. And for me, those are the main characteristic elements of his style. And again, we're not here to copy anybody. We want to study these great drummers, understand what they did, how they did it, and what it was that made them or helped make them the legendary drummers that they are. I want to thank you for being here with me today. I appreciate it. And please join me at Mike Trabulsie's Institute for the Artistry of Drumming.